If you've been following Eala for her tennis and stayed for everything else, you already know why this channel exists. Let's get into what actually happened. Start with the setting, because it matters. This wasn't a press conference or a sponsored appearance built for cameras. It was an ordinary morning practice session during the DC Open, the kind of session that usually happens behind fences with a handful of diehard fans watching through the gaps, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone warming up. That particular morning, a young Filipino-American college player named Harrison, an accounting major at James Madison University who'd put together a strong 15-4 singles season for his school, got the kind of morning most amateur players only dream about. He hit with Eala Fernandez at 9 o'clock. An hour later, he was on court with Eala herself. Then he stayed to watch Fernandez win her match later that day. He described it afterward with a simple phrase: an unbelievable morning, the kind of day that doesn't happen twice in a career, let alone in a single college tennis season. What happened after the hitting session is really the heart of this story. Eala and her coach didn't rush off to the next commitment on the schedule. They stayed behind at the practice courts to sign autographs and take photos with the fans who'd gathered there, tennis balls, caps, whatever people had brought along, hoping for even 30 seconds of her time. Nobody was requiring that of her. She'd already done the actual job that morning, the hitting, the training, the part that shows up on an official schedule somewhere. The part that came after, standing out in the heat, signing item after item for people who'd waited around a practice court on the chance she might, was entirely optional. She and her coach chose it anyway, with no obligation attached beyond their own instinct to do it. For a young Filipino-American player like Harrison, competing in American college tennis, that specific morning carried extra weight beyond just the novelty of it. Representation at the top level of this sport isn't something Filipino athletes have historically had much of, and getting to share a practice court with someone actively breaking that exact ceiling, then watching her stay behind afterward to connect with everyone else who'd shown up hoping for a moment with her, turned an already memorable morning into something clearly still living rent-free in his head. He was interviewed about it afterward by a Filipino sports journalist and former tennis player, and featured in an online piece and video about the experience. That's not a manufactured storyline, that's just what happened to one college kid on one ordinary Wednesday because two professional athletes decided to give a few extra minutes of their morning to the people around them. This kind of moment isn't really a one-off for her, either, and that consistency is really the part worth sitting with longer. Back when she was asked directly, in an interview with Tennis Channel, whether carrying such a massive, passionate fan base adds extra pressure to her actual tennis, she didn't deflect the question or give a rehearsed answer. She said plainly that of course she wants to give back as much as her fans give her. But she was careful to add something else too, something that actually reveals a lot about how she thinks about all of this pressure and attention. She said her first obligation is still to herself, to her own journey, to her family and her team, and that while she's genuinely grateful people want to follow along with what she's building, she owes it to herself first to give everything she has to that process before anything else. That's not a scripted PR line designed to sound humble. That's a 21-year-old being honest in real time about the actual balance between gratitude toward the people who show up for her and staying locked in on the job directly in front of her. And when she's actually home in the Philippines, that same instinct shows up in a slightly different form, but the same underlying pattern. After a homecoming following one of her tournament runs, greeted at the airport by fans who'd shown up specifically to welcome her back, she talked openly about how much it means to feel that kind of love and support. She said it makes her feel great to be received with that much gratitude and pride, both at home and during her matches overseas, and that in turn she's grateful back and wants to give back as much as she possibly can. Simple words. No theatrics, no grand single gesture engineered to go viral, just a consistent thread, showing up again and again across interviews given months apart, in completely different contexts about the people who show up for her. It's worth being honest about why a story like this actually matters more than it might look like on the surface, especially in a sports landscape that's grown increasingly transactional. There's a version of athlete fandom right now where almost every interaction has a price tag attached somewhere. Meet and greets get sold as premium packages. Appearances get scheduled through agencies with strict time limits, and genuine access to an athlete becomes something closer to a tiered product than a human moment. What happened on that DC practice court didn't follow that model at all. Nobody paid for that autograph session. Nobody scheduled it as a sponsored activation with a brand's name attached to it. It happened simply because two people who'd already finished their actual professional obligations for the morning decided the extra 20 minutes standing around in the summer heat was worth it for the handful of people who'd shown up hoping for exactly that. That's really the through line running across nearly everything Eala has said publicly about her fans over the past year. Not one single big dramatic gesture built for a headline, but a steady pattern of small, consistent choices. Staying an extra 20 minutes after a practice session, nobody was filming for content. thanking specific crowds by name and location in her press conferences after major wins, talking openly and repeatedly about wanting to give back rather than simply accepting the love as something she's automatically owed because of her results. Individually, none of these moments make much of a headline on their own. A signed tennis ball here, a quote in a Tennis Channel interview there, a short, warm answer at an airport homecoming. But stacked together across a full competitive season, they start to tell you something real about who she actually is once the scoreboard stops mattering for the day. And there's a specific reason this particular kind of moment keeps happening around her more than it seems to around most rising athletes at her level. The Filipino diaspora following her career isn't a passive audience watching quietly from a distance through a TV screen. It's a community that shows up in person, at practice courts behind chain-link fences, at hotel lobbies, outside stadium gates hours before doors open, in numbers that have caught tournament after tournament off guard throughout this entire season. When an athlete is being met with that level of genuine, deeply personal devotion match after match, city after city, country after country, the easy and entirely understandable thing to do would be to treat it as background noise on the way back to the locker room, something to smile at politely and keep moving past. Eala keeps choosing, apparently repeatedly, not to do that. She stops. She signs the ball. She takes the photo. She stays the extra 20 minutes that nobody would have blamed her for skipping. None of this happened because a camera crew was strategically positioned there to capture a viral moment for a highlight reel. It happened on what was, by every account, an entirely ordinary Tuesday morning practice session, documented mostly because one college player happened to post genuinely about the best morning of his tennis career, and a Philippine sports outlet picked up the story afterward because it was worth telling. That's actually the most convincing part of the whole thing, if you sit with it for a second. Nothing about this moment was staged for an audience or built around a brand partnership. It simply happened, quietly, in a way that appears to happen fairly often around her, whether or not anyone happens to be writing it down that particular day. So here's what I want to know. Have you had a moment like this with an athlete you followed closely? Something small and unscripted that ended up sticking with you far longer than it probably should have on paper? Drop it in the comments, because stories like this genuinely deserve to be told too. Not just the trophies, the scorelines, and the ranking jumps. If you're here for the tennis and staying for everything else about who Eala actually is once the cameras start drifting away, subscribe, because we're covering every part of this story, not just the results on the scoreboard.